So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on the test build of the new patch. And it seems like it's getting a little bit closer now, doesn't it, with a higher density of things that I am able to show off at the very least. And you may be wondering what exactly we are looking at. Well, this is the new version of CIRITH UNGOL. Obviously the map, as we have known it for a long time at this point, has been that canyony one with the rather small fortress in the middle. But this one is far more of a sprawling siege map, the likes of which it has a little bit of the stylings of the new version of Dol Guldur on it as well. Although I think actually this one is a little bit bigger than Dol Guldur, which is rather interesting. A large settlement for the defenders to sink their teeth into. You can see that there is this cave system as well, which is, well, the spider webbing is here, though the spider itself may very well not be. That is a unit type which I think is being brought into Dol Guldur. But they are not on the field today. We are instead going to be seeing, I think, a classic straight-up matchup between Mordor and Gondor by the looks of things. So in terms of the factions on display, ones that have definitely been around for a long time. But the map here is going to be the real star of the show, I would suggest. It's a big settlement, this as well, which does tend to be the way things have been. Ered Luin, as we saw fairly recently, was a pretty big settlement to try and get to grips with as well, which can be a bit of a double-edged sword for the defenders. It means they do have plenty of options when it comes to choosing places to defend. However, you can get a little bit lost within settlements like this if you are not able to set up solid defensive points, as we saw Ered Luin suffer from last time, though with slightly higher unit counts, Mordor maybe will be able to do the business in that regard. Anyway, we'll go through the attackers first and foremost before going further into the settlement itself. Starting off with the Gondorians here on the southward approach. We've got 2 times here and Mevon attacking from the south. So Gondor, in terms of the units they have at their disposal, there are a few differences with some of their individual units, but I don't think they have anything outright new. They have the reintroduction of the Vanguard of King Elisar as a high-end unit, but other than that, everything is much as it was, just with a few little differences in terms of how some of the units work. The Gondor's central force, obviously standard Gondor infantry and spears, still very much the same sort of thing, where you have access to those cheaper armour upgrades, so you can make them just that little bit tankier for not a huge amount of money, and especially against more numerous units of orcs, that can make a big difference, because that extra survivability means that they will stay standing for a little bit longer, and individually at the very least, certainly from the low to mid-tier units, stuff like this for Gondor is going to be able to outperform the likes of infantry that Mordor can field, though of course numbers are going to be a bit of a concern there. But 203 men per unit does also make the Gondor infantry a little bit more useful than they were. The problem they always used to have was they were just relatively unremarkable for what they offered, but now with more men in the unit, it means that numbers-wise they can actually stand toe-to-toe with quite a lot of units, and it makes them just that little bit more efficient on the front line as well. The same thing very much goes for the Gondor Spearmen as well, 163 men for them, but anti-cavalry, good at holding the line as well. Spears have got that extra defensive impetus, but the Spear Malus does mean that they're not going to be able to carve their way through the leagues of orcs that they're going to have to fight their way through in the Citadel itself. I think that's it for them. We've got another unit of the Gondor infantry just in behind. A trebuchet. We saw the artillery in the fight for Ered Luin be incredibly important, and that's going to be the case here as well, I would suggest, though. The elevation on CIRITH UNGOL, especially as you look at it here, it's a rather intimidating sight towering over them. Mordor can make life difficult for the Gondorian artillery simply from their positioning, but Gondor of course do have the option of peeling away walls as well, manned by standard Gondor spearmen as well, so they're not going to be hopeless in melee. We've got the Pelagia Marines, a basic unit of javelins. They've been pretty much the same ever since, you know, the very earliest days of Reforged. Simple javelin unit, nothing too spectacular, but simple javelins like this can be a really good supporting tool as you try to push your way through a settlement. And of course Mordor will be setting up solid front lines backed up by polearms and the like, I'm sure. Though Gondor do have access to another unit of javelins now, and it's more of a hybridised unit. The Citadel Guard, you know, a higher end unit of spears in melee, but now with also a ranged attack, it gives them a little bit more of a different dimension. Whether or not they're still going to be the tour de force they were in melee, or whether or not they've been adjusted downwards to account for the extra damage they now have at range, I'm not sure. But that's the sort of thing that we can delve into when we look at the stats, when we get to do faction overviews on the release of the new patch. But the Citadel Guard here, at least now we can assume that it's only a buff in that regard. Then we have the Nimlothian Honour Guard. The Fountain Guard in general have been changed to be more of a shock infantry style unit, more so than a phalanx defensive style unit. It gives them a little bit more speed when it comes to doing their killing, though it does make them maybe a little bit more vulnerable. It does force Gondor to diversify their front line a little bit, but it does also give them more of an aggressive tool, which they did kind of lack previously. They had a few units of shock infantry, but none that were really on the same level as these guys are. The Nimlothians, of course, with a big shield value as well, very, very strong. And then when you consider the Fountain Guard as well, their anti-cavalry bonus is still very much around, however, so they're going to be very, very deadly against enemy cavalry units. There's a few units way over here, Veterans of Osgiliath, and yes indeed, they have the full gold level armour upgrades. They have a third armour upgrade, the Veterans of Osgiliath, and this makes them probably one of the very best skirmishing archers in the game. Very, very solid, and of course shielded, good in melee as well when they're out of ammunition. As we make our way over to Mavon's army, I imagine it's going to be more or less the same sort of thing, with more Nimlothian Honour Guard, another trebuchet, so they're not lacking for artillery, a large amount of Gondor infantry and spears. There's a huge amount of rams. I don't know why this many were necessary, but here they are. Gondor spearmen pushing up siege towers as well, so it's good to see that numbers have been taken into account here. Mordor may very well have to be a little bit concerned about that. They should still have a lot of numbers themselves, but Gondor certainly not skimping on that. Fountain Guard, more fully upgraded Veterans of Osgiliath, more Citadel Guard. The only real difference here is that Mavon has decided to bring 2 units of the upgraded Axemen of Lasarnak as well, for yet more armour-piercing punch on the front line. Over on the other side, the northward approach, we have Froggy. His army is in a very dense blob, so I don't know if we're going to be able to see anything all that new. We've got the fully upgraded Veterans, still definitely a very popular unit from the looks of things. Gondor Spearmen here in high numbers. He does have the Vanguard of King Elisar, who certainly stand out among the silver of the rest of the Gondorian army, with their more sort of onyx grey look. And it does give another aggressive option for Gondor at the very high end as well, the sort of heavy swordsman unit, which in the last version of the game very much the focus of their allies and underlings in Dol Amroth, but they have an option there now as well. Nimlothian Honour Guard, so maybe a little bit more of a high quality army this, by the looks of things, smaller, but again a little bit more damage dealing potential perhaps. We have Tundra's Fox, we've got some Gondor infantry as well, plenty of siege towers here, more Pelagia Marines for more javelin pressure, plenty of Gondor infantry here, so they're not lacking for numbers, with Tundra's Fox bringing plenty of them. Just in behind we have a row of Gondor spearmen as well, and then further back we have some Fountain Guard, we have some Axemen of Lasarnak and more Vanguard of King Elisar, so lots of shock infantry options here from the Gondorians, plenty of damage dealing potential here, Pelagia Marines, more Javelins, Citadel Guard as well adding to that, infantry and axemen, and then also another artillery piece as well, another trebuchet crew to add more fuel to that particular fire. As we make our way towards the settlement, a bit of a thinner approach over here by the looks of things though, so artillery may very well prove to be extremely important, though. It looks as though at least the very first layer, Mordor are going to allow Gondor a little bit more room and maybe try and use the terrain in behind. We have Sin of the Dark Cloud here, who has got some Uruk infantry, the standard Mordor forces, 253, so they still outnumber man for man, orc for orc, the Gondor infantry they're facing off against. But of course, we always know what the Uruk infantry are all about. Individually, they're not too remarkable, but the fact that they're reasonably cheap and there's a lot of them, and ultimately their stats are pretty decent for what they are, it makes them a pretty dependable unit on the front line, ultimately, though not match winners. We do have some troll drummers in and amongst things as well, though they are merely the officers of these individual units. Just in behind we also have the Uruk Halberd. It's going to be very important this for Mordor in terms of phalanx units. Gondor don't seem to have brought their guards of Osgiliath, which does mean that the halberdiers could very well be very useful, particularly with the changes made to the Fountain Guard. It could be that Mordor hold a bit of a phalanx advantage with that in mind. We'll see if Gondor live to regret that particular decision. Uruk infantry, we've got the Orc Maulers as well. Mr. Sneakman playing as Mordor, so a bit of low-end armour piercing, always going to be useful against Gondor though, armour piercing, and that certainly won't change with this new patch's arrival. More Uruk infantry, more Orc Maulers, got some Orc Javelins as well, cheap Javelins like this. We already mentioned with the Pelagia Marines how useful they can be, but with Orc Javelins it's even more so. Individually they are weaker, but they are very cheap. and a hailstorm of javelins is exactly the sort of thing that can help soften the Gondorians up for the kill. Troll catapults in a nasty position. They do need to be a little bit careful of the trebuchet's enhanced range, but this is the ideal sort of killing ground really for a catapult. We saw how effective defensive artillery can be in the last replay that we saw in the new patch, albeit it wasn't enough to save Ered Luin on that occasion. More Uruk halberds, we have the Morgul Chosen, the higher end unit of more resilient spears Mordor can rely upon as a bit of a hard centre to their line. Very useful facet of the Mordor army, that. Ardenheim Shadowbows, with the changes made to rangers, this is going to be merely high base damage now, but still, as much as Gondor can resist arrow fire, with rangers being very high damage indeed, they will still be able to do an awful lot of damage. Orc Maulers, you can see that so far we haven't seen a dearth of Mordor's upper end units, but then they are on the defence and it is a 4v4, so they're going to have to save money somehow with more halberds, more Morgul Chosen. The Temple Guard are here, another unit of armour-piercing archers, so we've got the Eclipse 2500, who's going to be playing as Mordor as well. Beasts of Gorgoroth, now this is a unit which has been made far more useful in this version of the game. It used to be that especially these guys, but also the Mumakil and other monstrous cavalry like this, was very hard to use. Beasts of Gorgoroth were next to useless in fact, but that is certainly not true anymore. If anything, it's gone a little bit further the other way. They're very expensive, mind you, and more of an aggressive unit as well, so if the time comes for a counter push from the defenders, the beasts are going to have to be the ones to instigate that, and Gondor will have to be on the lookout for it. Upper end armour piercing in the Sauron's Will, always going to be pretty handy as well. More Sauron's Will, we've got the Temple Executioners here with the armour upgrade, heavy swordsman to heavy swordsman. I think the armour upgrade would still make them stronger than the Vanguard. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Great Shield Infantry. We'll see how Great Shield Infantry is in the meta of this version of the game. I can't imagine they've changed too much, and it pretty much all but prevents Gondor from trying to engage in mass pushing tactics, but that was unlikely anyway. It's very rare that you see that sort of tactic used against the Orcs, unless it is an Orc civil war. We have some Uruk infantry further down here before we move over to the other side of the settlement. We do have more Uruk infantry, we've got some Orc javelins, and then up here on the bridge, a really good position here for a unit of Temple Guard as well to start firing down on Gondor as they make their way through that rather nasty first part of the fortress as we make our way over, I should say, to the south side. Morgul Chosen, Uruk archers up here on the walls as well with a good position to shoot down as Gondor try to make their way up through the snaking roads. More Morgul Chosen, we have more Sauron's Will, relatively uniform armies this, with Uruk archers up here on another one of these flyovers. Troll Catapult in a good position as well, plenty of artillery action going to be had here. That particular chess match, whoever wins that is setting themselves up well for the later stages. Uruk archers, Uruk halberds, plenty of Orc maulers, cannon fodder playing over on this side of things. Morgul Chosen, we have a unit of the standard troll drummers to keep the Orcs facing the right direction in terms of overall quality. Gondor will put them to task after all, and you don't want to be seeing your morale crumble. That is one way to lose a battle. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, more Orc javelins, and then through the spider caverns we have Uruk halberds, Sauron's Will, more Uruk infantry. So relatively standardised this from Mordor. Blackguard of Barad-dûr and Morgul Chosen offering a little bit more of a solid look to several of their units, and their archers in good positions as well. Olak High, interesting unit to see. Troll Catapult, and then excuse me, back here in the town centre, I imagine this is where we'll see a few more upper end units, including the Uruk Chieftains, more Temple Executioners, more Olag High, some Orc fodder in here as well, certainly not upper end. Blackguard of Barad-dûr and more Uruk Chieftains, so yeah, they have a good amount of quality they can dip into throughout the settlement should they need to, but for now at the very least this is going to be a fairly long affair, I would say. The Orcs are actually going to make a small outside of the walls on this side anyway to prevent them from immediately overrunning the elevation advantage they have here with their Uruk archers. Now, as we briefly mentioned in the composition phase as well, this is the kind of pressure that the Gondorians among the human factions tend to be reasonably good at absorbing, even in this new version of the game where the mechanics and the meta and the stats are all a little bit more foreign to me. Gondor are always going to have this extra resilience when it comes to especially basic arrow fire like this. This is also a rather intriguing tactic to use, however, with the Orcs starting to counter-attack right from the off. It's a good opportunity for the Gondorians to maybe try and overwhelm an initial sally forth from the Mordor orcs. I mean, especially orc maulers like this, if you put them under enough pressure, their really low melee defense will ultimately get the better of them, even if that armor piercing is going to be useful against that Gondorian plate armor. Uruk infantry also moving forward in support, a little bit more of a well-rounded unit in terms of their ability to stay alive for longer. Very interesting sort of interactions between units like this, though, when you consider how, even with the armor upgrade, how poor the Orc Maulers' defensive abilities are, and yet their offensive abilities are exactly what you need for dealing with a unit like the Gondor infantry and Gondor spears. The one troll drummer still lives, the Uruk infantry already shaken. A good sign for Gondor with how many units they have on the front line, and the fact that individually speaking, of course, these Gondor infantrymen should have the beating of the units they're facing off against. One section of the wall at the top of the hill there does crumble, a good opportunity for the Gondorians to push further in, and that does mean that the Uruk archers have had to move as well, though they're still in a good position, and it's going to have to be a slow burn in terms of the damage that these Uruk archers are capable of doing. It's kind of a rarity that Mordor are going to fancy their chances of actually making a dent in Gondor with their archers, but the layout of the settlement being what it is will certainly inform that choice. But once again, we're seeing from the off here a defensive choice which is going to put Mordor under a little bit more pressure in the early stages, but one that the Gondorians will certainly welcome, because it's a really good opportunity here to deal with maybe not the most powerful of Mordor's units quickly, but a fair chunk of their initial defence. As we can also see over here, Morgul Chosen also sallying out, so I mean it's a fairly substantial force this, and that does mean that the Gondorians themselves will take some not insubstantial losses in having to try and deal with them. Morgul Chosen already wavering as well. Being in close proximity to this amount of Gondorians is the main thing which is going to cause concern here. The Morgul Chosen now trying to retreat, but are they going to be allowed to? Maybe Mavin didn't fancy the Gondor infantry's chances against those heavier spears, but maybe an opportunity to retreat back in through the gatehouse, as the Uruk chieftains also managed to retreat, so they thought about moving forwards, but maybe were not out in the open field for quite as long as that initial wave of maulers and infantry. As the arrows continue to fly, meanwhile, over here, yeah, this first little section was not being initially defended by Mordor, seeing more of an opportunity with the raised terrain they've got further back to try and make an impact, so the walls already being conquered. So yeah, this is an example of the settlement where the walls are so large that actually the siege towers, it looks a little bit peculiar because they don't actually reach the battlements, but still. Veterans of Osgiliath getting into place. And the ram unopposed over on this side. Veterans are actually already in a position where they can fire, needing to thread the needle over there. Orc maulers probably not going after the troll catapult, I would suggest. Archers will take an awfully long time to try and finish them off. Trying to thread the needle back though with the catapult. Is that a good use of ammunition? I'm not sure. The veterans are a very powerful unit, especially with that gold level armour upgrade, which is meaningless when you've got a giant flaming boulder screaming towards you. But so far, no hits landed as the Gondorians move in. It's a fairly comprehensive front line this from Mordor, so Gondor are going to need to stack up with a lot of what they have. Nothing on this front line again is all that scary on an individual basis, but good support in behind, the artillery being there, and the numbers that Mordor are working with are the key. Move over to the other side. Gondor wasting limited time. They are moving in and they are engaging with a slightly more prepared Mordor front line in behind the walls. While the counter-attack may not have gone quite as well as the Orcs would have wanted, they can reset themselves, and Mordor, of course, as always, will have the manpower to be able to ride these setbacks a little bit more so than other factions might be able to. And Uruk halberds in place as well. This first unit of Gondor infantry not going to have the best of times against a prepared line of halberdiers, especially not with the troll drummers keeping them in place. Morgul Chosen and Orc javelins acting as a good defensive bulwark and a nice ranged support unit respectively. The javelin's going to be able to a little bit of damage to the units in behind, and actually trying to target down the Nimlothian Honour Guard, which are very close. Not the sort of unit you want to be losing to Orc Javelin, so they're going to want to get out of there pretty quickly. Or be committed to the front line. It would be an early committal of such a strong unit, but it would also force Mordor's hand a little bit more as the Gondor Spearmen make their way in through the gate. Lots of halberds though, the backbone of this defence. All of the defending armies today have plenty of them, and as we've already mentioned, not a huge amount of polearms that Gondor have in response. Some really good hits there though from the artillery from on high. That's the sort of thing which Gondor won't be able to take too much of. We saw in the last replay on Ered Luin, it was, in spite of the artillery being extremely strong, in the end it was only enough to close the gap that Ered Luin already had foisted upon themselves. But here, no such huge advantage has yet been gained, so it's not the sort of thing which Gondor can afford too much of. And the Olag High as well. The Olag High is still a smaller unit of trolls, so that would speak to the fact that individually they are stronger than many of the other units that we've seen, of course with the cave trolls having a mighty 40 per unit now. On an individual basis, it does go to show what sort of differences in stats we're likely to see when we go through the faction overviews. Trying to burrow their way through the lines. This is actually a wise move from the Gondorians, because it will make the artillery a far more risky thing for Mordor to use if they're in and amongst their own men. And as we saw last time, Orcs are more likely to rout. A bit of friendly fire is the sort of thing which may send all of these Uruks scurrying back deeper into the fortress. Olag High doing their thing. They don't really have any supremely damaging units on the front line here, Gondor, which may prove to be a little bit of an issue for them. So far it is just infantry and spears. Dependable though they may be, I think they do need a little bit of a damage spike, especially when it comes to dealing with the trolls that are now a part of the front line. And they don't want to be making it too much of a grind fest when you consider that's exactly the sort of engagement that the halberdiers will likely relish. And over here we're seeing very much the same sort of thing as well. Froggy sending forward his own Gondor infantry, though the difference here is that the Gondorians have been able to get their own archers up onto walls that they've already taken, so they've got a good opportunity to shoot down into the Mordor lines as much as Mordor have to shoot into the Gondorian attack. Although once again it's going to be artillery, though friendly fire and hitting the Gondorian lines there are a mix of both, although it is actually the Gondorians that flee in the face of that. So Mordor are actually holding themselves together, but then they have more on the front line. So far, a little bit more of a skeleton crew from Gondor, especially now that we've seen a fair amount of routing from them. Pelagi Marines trying to offer their support as well. More infantry on the way forward. The Orc Javelins positioning themselves on the rocks to try and get some point-blank hits. I mean, the Veterans of Osgiliath are more of a defensive archer, but they are high tier, so the baseline damage is still not going to be all that bad. Defeat is almost a certainty for the Gondor infantry. They're going to need more on the front line then, as the centre pretty much completely collapsed. So that does leave it completely open to those archer volleys that we've already seen. Arrows finding their mark. And the javelins also doing the same. It's always hard to quantify how much damage ranged units like that are doing, especially against a more numbers-heavy force like Mordor, but this is the sort of thing which will add up in the long run. It's the sort of thing that Gondor will need to add up in the long run as well. There goes the Troll Drummer officer, brought down by the infantry. As more infantry units are coming forward, and Axeman of Lasarnak offering perhaps a much-needed damage spike for the Gondorians on the front line. The armour of the Uruks may not be as finely crafted as the Gondorians, but it is still their primary means of defence, so a bit of armour piercing will certainly not go amiss. As the blows start raining down. Supporting units in behind them in the Orc Javelins, they've taken hits, but that is also a sign that the Veterans of Osgiliath have felt the need that they actually need to try and do a bit of counter-skirmishing. Is it the best use of their time? It's always the question when having to deal with a unit of lowly javelins like this. More units arriving, more Gondor spearmen, so Gondor's strength on the front line is replenished. For now, at the very least. Uruk halberds. Still pretty dependable frontline force thus far. How much ammunition do the veterans of Osgiliath truly have? For the time being, they will be pretty pleased with their contribution to the Gondorian front line. That is, of course, the downside to Mordor allowing Gondor this first little chunk of the settlement unopposed. They still have the terrain advantage, of course, but still. More Gondor infantry on the way forward. The increased unit size of the Gondor infantry does allow this sort of tactic that Gondor are now employing, maybe trying to fight fire with fire. They still may not be as numbers heavy as Mordor's entry-level units, but no longer is the gap so severe. Which I guess the gap, Uruk infantry, as they were the Morannon infantry, had 200 men, so I guess the gap is still the same, but generally speaking, having more men in the unit does allow you to engage in this sort of tactic a little bit more readily. Only 2 troll drummers left, looking as though this front line, Mordor, content to retreat. Seemingly they're happy with the dents they've made in Gondor over here. As the Gondorians move forward, of course, the less of Mordor there are on the front line, the more tempted they may be to resume the artillery barrage. They managed to... Well, Citadel Guard have moved in, javelins from on high, Pelagia Marines, although a bit of friendly fire is fairly likely over here. Citadel Guard should be a little bit more well suited for taking on Olag High. Yeah, and as expected, really. Now that Mordor are falling apart on the front line, they have nothing to lose by resuming the catapult bombardment. Getting some decent hits on the Citadel Guard as well. Still pockets of Uruk resistance down here, centred around the Olag High, but I'm sure the Olag High would prefer if they had a slightly more solid backup unit than the Uruk archers. The Vets of Osgiliath so far been one of the more key units for Gondor, especially over here now, if they can get themselves situated as well. And choices now for the Gondorians. They can either take the snaking road in this direction, more direct route perhaps to meet up with their allies on the other side, or they can take the trip through the Spiders' Caverns, which is, I think, the more direct route to the town centre, though you would have to question whether they are ready for such things or not. Over here, this renewed Gondor presence on the front line, Orc javelins being committed, we're starting to see Gondor maybe gain the upper hand over on this side as well. Orc javelins moving around. Veterans of Osgiliath firing volleys in. Artillery hits still, although this time it is from Gondor. Risky to use artillery this close, but it is enough to cause the routing of more of Mordor's units, and that is surely going to mark the end of Mordor's resistance here at the base of the hill. So reasonably well synchronised here, the attackers, whether by accident or by design. They will be able to start pushing on to the respective second defensive layers at around the same time, and that's always a fairly key thing when we're talking about successive attacks like this. More Gondor spearmen. Nothing too special has been committed to the front line infantry-wise over here just yet. Really, the Axemen of Lasarnak offering their services, probably the most significant addition. That was a fairly bruising encounter for both sides, yet one that hasn't crippled either. There's also the fact that the interior of the settlement, so they both have the option of trying to meet up with one another over there, or they can try and take the more direct route to the town centre, which is behind fortifications and gates. So what will they do? There's still plenty of Mordor defenders. I mean, this position over here looks fairly intimidating, but I don't know. It's a long battle, this, so we are most assuredly going to see pretty much all that the map has to offer, I would suggest. Fortifications way above them. Rather intimidating force for these Gondorian soldiers, already very tired from their exertions on the first layer, and yet the battle is far from over. So the Gondor Spearmen waiting to advance. Veterans of Osgiliath guarding the Spider's caverns from any sort of counter-attack that Eclipse may want to engage in. They're going to need to get a force substantial enough, similar in scale really to the first layer. Gondor do have plenty left. Let's not forget as well that so far Gondor should have access to some of their more solid units. We've seen some of the Axemen used, we've seen a unit of Citadel Guard utilised as well, but Gondor have plenty more than that, including the mighty Fountain Guard, which should be, even still, despite their slightly different nature now, should still be very well suited for facing off against Mordor. The gates, which are apparently open, just a little bit confusing, but it is a good opportunity for Tundra's Fox to try and get in and amongst things here, although maybe this has come a little bit too soon, given the fact that Mordor have a lot of units over here. The Morgul Chosen are not going to fold, especially not when they're backed up by Uruk halberds. The Gondorians are already shaken, and they have enough units that they can get up the hill quickly enough to consolidate the unexpected gains that they've made here. I'm not sure. Well, Gondor infantry, Veterans of Osgiliath as well, 61 of them. I don't know if they're still locked morale. I don't think they've lost that trait, but that will be extremely useful in a situation like this. It means Gondor aren't going anywhere unless Mordor can kill them all. The gates apparently open. Who knew? This one of the Sarnak pushing forward. The archers not here on this flyover anymore. Moving backwards instead. There's not a lot of cover up there, I suppose, but still. Also, they've almost certainly used all their ammunition on that initial front line, given the sight line that they had. Not a huge amount of orcs over here. If Gondor really focused their strength, I mean, 3 units of Uruk infantry is not going to be enough to stop Gondor if they really set their mind to it. Those beasts of Gorgoroth are still going to be a bit of a worrisome foe for the Gondorians. Gondor managing to stabilise the front line a little bit now with some reinforcements. For the time being, the Mordor combatants here still fancy their chances. Uruk halberds, a big part of that, I'm assuming. Making my way over here then, are we going to see a general advance? We are. Pretty well prepared front line over here, you'd have to say. A combination of the Blackguard and the Sauron's Will, with Morgul Chosen in behind. Some of the stronger sort of mid to upper tier units, I suppose you would classify all 3 of them as, with Mordor. Varying places along the sliding scale, but certainly will require something a little bit more than the standard Uruks to try and bring down. As much as the Gondor Spearmen and Infantry have been improved by the numbers changes to them, especially against something like the Sauron's Will, that's going to be a tough ask for them. Fountain Guard in and amongst things, though, will certainly make a big difference, especially against a force like the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, for whom general combat was never the primary concern. I don't know if these Pelagia Marines are out of ammunition or not, but more warm bodies for the front line will certainly help keep the fires stoked just that little bit longer. Orc Javelins and Uruk Archers returning fire into the Veterans of Osgiliath that are in behind. Good opportunities here for kills, but Veterans of Osgiliath, any arrows that are hitting the front of the Morgul Chosen, their armour and shields withstanding those blows quite nicely. And archer to archer, the Uruk Archers of course won't really stand too much of a chance against the Veterans, but again, the addition of those Fountain Guardsmen really has made a big difference here. Meanwhile, we make our way into the caverns. Temple Guard in place, firing away. And the front lines already being tested. For such a long battle so far, we haven't really had any lulls in proceedings. There's been pretty consistent fighting. Veterans of Osgiliath out of ammunition as well, moving in over here. Once again, we're seeing a unit of Blackguard of Barad-dûr try and take the lead on the defence. They don't have quite the same level of support over here as they do back in the main fortress, especially with a little bit of javelin support as well from the Citadel Guard. Blackguard now moving backwards, so a bit of a surrender there. They're going to try and move backwards to more advantageous terrain, Mordor, provided they don't rout while peeling themselves off the Gondorian front line. Somewhat similar story over here, I would imagine, although will the Uruk infantry simply stand and fight to the bitter end? Once again, combination of the spearmen and infantry from Gondor acting as a reliable centre. Then over here, the Beasts of Gorgoroth moved forward. Caused a bit of a dent here, a bit of a stir, although I don't know if that was necessarily the best time to utilise them. I mean, when you've got Fountain Guard on the front line, probably one of the better units for dealing with them, although the Gondorians do look a little bit more thin on the ground now. A combination of the javelins and the sheer heft that the beasts bring to the table, enough to damage the Gondorian presence here. The Morgul Chosen now moving forward to try and shore up the line against a now weakened Gondorian effort, but spearmen and infantry on the way forwards as well. Make our way back. Are we also seeing an engagement over yonder? We are indeed. Pushing up the hill under the overpass, trying to use the siege towers. This is one of those techniques where I've never been fully convinced of how does it really work, this? I mean, it definitely moves units out of the way, but it also puts the unit pushing the siege tower in very much in harm's way. It's one of those weird things. I mean, it looks effective, and maybe that does make it a good idea. Imlothian Honor Guard are in it amongst things as well, so that's certainly a statement of intent by the Gondorians over here. They don't want to get bogged down in these positions too long. They want to be making consistent progress towards the town centre and to the Tower of CIRITH UNGOL itself. Victory a distinct possibility. The Sauron's will certainly be an efficient combatant on the front line, but will they have the support around them? Will they have the numbers to meet the metal tide which is upon them? Especially in terms of quality, the Nimlothians mean that there isn't really anything Mordor could commit short of really their very best units that would make a huge difference there. Meanwhile, Mordor actively managing to push Gondor back through the gate here, which is an impressive feat, although in so doing the shoe is now very much on the other foot, as the Gondorians are now able to surround Mordor, and any sort of gains that were made are probably going to be neutralised back the other way, unfortunately for Mordor. Again, another siege tower, a good opportunity to get up onto the walls, but Mordor have plenty of reinforcements here. They've already got their ranged units in position as well, including the quite scary Ardenaim shadow bows. Trebuchet flinging projectiles way overhead, going after a wall, maybe future-proofing a little bit. Want to knock holes, make a return to the Spider's caverns. Mordor still fighting hard. The catapults crumbled. Defeat for Gondor. Uruk infantry fighting hard on the front line. There was a routing unit there, but nothing too much is changing on the front line, so I can't imagine it was all that important. Citadel Guard reloading. Trebuchet crew. There goes that section of wall which the other Trebuchet was banking shots to destroy. Clearly they have some plan in mind in Gondor. Temple Guard out of ammunition, now joining the front line as well, helping to shore up that Uruk infantry, which is still standing in all fairness. Very well done to them. Victory seems certain still for Gondor, though with Temple Guard and with Troll catapult crews starting to rain down upon them, I don't know if that will remain the case. My guess would be no. Veterans of Osgiliath standing ready and waiting. The Nimlothian Honor Guard as well. There are more reinforcements, though. We are seeing sort of the extent of what Gondor can commit units to at this stage. can't simply go all in absolutely everywhere, which is the main difference when you're seeing one of the Western Kingdoms of Men on the attack. If the roles were reversed, Mordor could more easily maintain more numbers, if not, you know, maybe less quality on the front line, but they would be able to maintain more numbers across their various attacks. Orc Javelins once again in a good position. Uruk Archers up on that flyover with good shots down into these Gondorians. Shields may be pointing in the right direction, but still consistent damage being delivered to the attackers. And with Morgul chosen and Blackguard Barad-dûr on the front line, decent defensive stalwarts. Gondor's progress is stalling in this direction a little bit. Reinforcements are a little bit further back. The unit of spears on the way here, but I don't know. Gondorians are shaken, and I was worried about that. I mean, we have seen already in this battle, Gondor's morale may generally be a bit better than Mordor's on an individual basis, but they're by no means the kind of force which cannot be routed, short of overall victory in the battle. They're no Khazad-dûm, they're no Imladris, in spite of their qualities. Meanwhile, in Lothian Honor Guard, balance of forces is evenly matched as a strange one. There's some dead beasts of Gorgoroth over here. There went the beasts, I saw them in the background. So they are still alive, albeit both encounters have not been without problem for them. Starting to see a little bit more wear and tear on Mordor's force, although it looks, maybe not that unit, but 182 suggests that a fresh unit of Uruk infantry was committed to this front line, maybe just to try and slow the Gondorians a little bit more, keep them at arm's length in the battle for a little bit longer, and then later on depend a little bit more upon their quality to win the battle overall. Pelargia Marines up on the wall once again. Gondor forcing their way back through this interior gate. And in so doing, of course, they put themselves right in harm's way of the Orc Javelins and of the Ardenheim Shadow Bows, making the trip from Durthang to help reinforce this crumbling fortress. Uruk chieftains stopping the veterans of Osgiliath from getting any further along the wall, thereby preventing any sort of direct overwatch from Gondorian archers. Victory seems certain. Defeat for Gondor. Still. Though I do feel as though that will probably change if they can commit more units forward, but I've already mentioned so far that Gondor, there's already a sense that there is an upper limit on what they are actually capable of here, and you're likely to see that come about more quickly than you would if the roles were reversed. Still a bit of armour piercing on the front line. Gondor infantry and spearmen have been far more dependable in this battle than we've seen them be in the previous version of the game, I would suggest. This is kind of how they should be viewed. Maybe it will give Gondor as a faction a much needed boost. We are also seeing now the vanguard of King Elisar on the front line, and their presence has already made a little bit of difference by the looks of things. Mordor perhaps sensing that this position is no longer worth defending with all their gusto, so they're going to retreat a few units over towards the central courtyard over there, leaving a few units behind as a rear guard. Out of ammunition, Orc Javelins are almost certainly not going to last very long in the face of Aragorn's personal guard. Victory for Gondor, how quickly things can change around a little. What have we got back over here? Gondor are victorious over here in the end. Bit of back and forth in the Spider's Caverns, but considering the level of quality of the troops here, mostly Uruk infantry with a few bodyguards here, units here and there, Gondor were always likely to eventually be able to get through. Is this one troll officer taking on this one Gondorian infantryman? Technically speaking, he is actually a troll catapult crew as well, so he's not a troll officer. So he will have the stats of a troll. Though he's not going to last very long under the attentions of the Nimlothians. And that is very much going to be that. Further back, stacking up the Gondorians, the rams, climbing the hill. I mean, having all of those rams is good for something, I suppose. It means that you really have no excuse not to be ready to smash through a fortification when the time comes. Over here, though, it does look as though the Gondorian attack is stalling out a little bit again. The more readily available ranged support and the lack of numbers on the front line does seem to be harming Gondor's chances here. Spears. Still, they're going to be dependent on their regular units more than anything else, I would suggest. Even the trebuchet crew, after all, the standard Gondor spears, but do they have enough here? Maybe they need to wait until they've made a little bit more progress elsewhere and then try and go all in over here, because if they were to do so right now, I think Mordor would probably bring about the end of that particular attack. And over here, there is a certain inevitability to the progress they're going to make. There isn't really anything else that Mordor can commit at this point that would make this worthwhile. No more units of Uruk infantry fit for the muster. Catapult. They have a pretty good angle here, though. Maybe that is the thought behind using the siege towers. Utilise them as a makeshift shield. And how much artillery ammunition can Mordor afford to utilise ineffectively? There's a little bit of damage done, even in spite of that projectile hitting the shield, especially when you consider that some of these units, I mean the Vanguard and the Nimlothian Honour Guard, the two most dangerous Gondorian units are the ones pushing up the siege towers directly in the face of these catapult crews. Big risk, all it takes is one shot to thread the needle and you've lost a huge amount of effectiveness. Pushing into the later stages. Fountain Guard pushing up siege towers as well. And the siege towers are not indestructible either. They actually can take a real beating from artillery, in all fairness. Time and time again when we see siege towers fall, it's usually because of arrow towers on the settlement more so than defending artillery, but they do manage to kill off a few of those Vanguard of King Alisar there. Could be a fairly key moment in the battle, this, because this level of Gondorian quality late on could be the sort of thing which puts the battle beyond Mordor, or not having it could make Gondor not strong enough to take the final parts of the fortress. We have managed to sort of get behind effectively what is cover, I suppose. The ground now very much in the way. Meanwhile, Gondor managing to regroup themselves and now once again resuming their march forwards, with their allies also doing the same on the other side. They will actually meet up. All the while, the other detachments of their various armies so going to do the same. Taking their sweet time in getting through this area though. Unlike on the other side, this gate seems very much intact. And they are going to smash their way through a wall first and foremost. I mean, having a look over here, Mordor have got a force ready to defend, but it doesn't seem as substantial as the one on the other side, which has had success in already pushing back the Gondorians once. Gondor kind of biding their time here by the looks of things. A few of the Gondor infantry. Interestingly enough, this unit of Uruk infantry is actually shaken, so I don't know if they're going to be sticking around too long. Uruk chieftains still fighting up here. against something. But the main event is going to be happening over here sooner rather than later, I would suggest, with both forces meeting up with one another, or almost. Thin lines of orcs still prevent the reunion of the various Gondorian legions, but not for too much longer. Sauron's will, once again, if they had a bit of support, this would be working out quite nicely again against standard infantry and spears, but the numbers being what they are is going to take that away from them. Over yonder we have the Sauron's will as well, albeit over here it was always going to be a little bit more difficult for them given the presence of the Fountain Guard on the front line, definitely able to fight fire with fire there, the Gondorians. Further back, still taking cover down below the fortifications so that the catapult doesn't find them easy, although the catapult has actually been destroyed. So the Gondorian artillery, the ones doing the business now. So how will Mordor set up over here? They've already got a gap to deal with, so Gondor don't have to worry too much about their attacks stalling out later. Interesting that the trolls are going to be moving over here. I don't think that the troll catapult crew are going to do that well against the Fountain Guard in their current guise. Once again, we're seeing the siege tower being used in this capacity. In Lothian Honor Guard. Sauron's will. Yeah, both of those high damage units, they're going to make very quick work of the troll catapult, you would suggest. And as if that wasn't enough, the Gondorians will reunite with one another, a unit of Gondor infantry coming in from the rear, shutting the door on the troll catapult's retreat. Good example of some fairly efficient engagement this from Gondor. Sauron's will. Moving further back, this wall crumbling, a good opportunity to resume the festivities. Again, Ardenheim shadow bows trying to make good use of their positioning here. As I said in the early stages, rare that Mordor have the opportunity against Gondor to try and really take them to task with archery. All chosen. Uruk halberds as well. We're seeing less of the Uruk halberds actually. They were a real mainstay on the front line for Mordor in the early stages, but many of them were used up, it seems, and now they only have a few to rely upon. Very strong anchor in the early stages, but there's less of them now. Once again, another troll catapult crew being sent in. With this in the Ered battle, we can see already the increased importance the trolls seem to have in Orcish armies, just through sheer numbers alone. They represent a bigger part of what they're going to be all about. Archers trying to go after the trebuchet crew, but shielded as they are, 107 of them as well, so it's unlikely that you're going to be able to kill off all of them, even with a unit of high damage archers like the Ardenheim shadow bows. The Lothian Honor Guard on the front line should make relatively quick work of lowlier trolls. See their arrows breaking against the walls. Citadel Guards and veterans already taking up a position there as well. Is the assault over here renewed? It has. So the Gondorians are working in tandem pretty well, and that tends to speak well of attackers. Victory seems certain. Fountain Guard. Seeing more and more of the Fountain Guard and their shielded counterparts be more of a factor in this one. Temple Guard in a very good position here. This has been an avenue of attack which has been pretty difficult for the Gondorians, but still reopening it now I think is the right move, considering the pressure that Mordor are under on all other fronts as well. And over here, either side of the statue, looted perhaps from conquered holdings like Minas Morgul. Fountain Guard on the front line. Once again, the combination of Sauron's Will and Blackguard of Barad-dûr offering a slightly more sturdy foe than Orc Maulers and Uruk infantry would, but is that going to be enough? Victory seems certain. Citadel Guard. Again, higher end spears, Gondor very well known for these. Combining a little bit of offensive sting with the kind of defensive attributes you'd expect from a high end spear like this, and the addition of those javelin volleys that they now have make them maybe one of the most well-rounded units that the game has to offer, the Citadel Guard. Forward come the Temple Executioners, so trying to fight fire with fire now, Mordor. And Lothian Honor Guard, seen as a threat. Temple Executioners, one of those units which can certainly, if not more than go toe-to-toe with them, depending on the situation. And forward come the Beasts of Gorgoroth once more. Going to try and add some shock value to this front line. There goes a general, and I believe that was a Gondorian general as well. So maybe morale shocks can be used to good effect here for Mordor. They do have some fear-causing units after all, javelins, many of them hitting the siege tower, splintering the wood, but moving in. Each swing of those great swords and axes, yeah, unsurprisingly there, not able to establish themselves and start doing melee damage really there, the beasts. Trying to stem the tide, but I don't know, I think this front line, it's probably worth retreating from this one, from a Mordor perspective at this point. Try and centre your efforts around sturdier fortifications perhaps. Reinforced gates are actually already fairly damaged. Interesting tactic to try and use a trebuchet to bring down gates, but once again, it just means that you don't have to waste any time later. Uruk archers being sent forward perhaps as a delaying measure. Give them a little bit more time to sort themselves out. Further over here you can see that the Gondorians starting to wrap around Mordor a little bit more. That constricting feeling starting to tighten around the orcs, you would suggest. Good hit there into the centre of the Uruk archers. More damage being done. Is this the sort of damage to manpower that Mordor can afford to sustain? I'm sure that it is. I mean, you're starting to get the sense that Gondor are gaining ground. I mean, over here, we already mentioned this, unlike on the other side, this was a little bit more bare bones, this defence. I mean, it's now a fairly bare-bones attack as well. Gondor don't have too much left in the tank, but it's still progress that's being made. And more of these little individual battles are being won by the attackers. There goes the gatehouse. More room for the Gondorians to work with. There's a lot of Fountain Guard and Lothian Honor Guard still. A bold charge forward by the Sauron's Will. Fountain Guard, maybe a little bit more well suited actually for fighting on walls now with their slightly different focus. They still have, I think, spear animations. Get my words out. Maybe it makes them a little bit more similar to something like the Nurad Storm Guard from Canned. They're a unit which probably best fits the description now. They were a completely unique unit before, but now maybe the Fountain Guard and Nimlothian Honor Guard can count themselves among that particular number of slightly bizarre shock infantry polearm hybrids. Offensive polearms. Gondor's starting to make more progress over here. A little bit more left in the tank over here, it must be said, from Gondor. So that decision to wait a little while and reset and then resume their march now, definitely the right call by Tundra's Fox. Another one of the Beasts of Gorgoroth falls. Javelins being used. We haven't seen the Beasts of Gorgoroth at their best actually in this battle, and yet even still they've been able to be effective in what they've been doing. They haven't necessarily been doing the most damage, but they have been getting in the way of Gondor's momentum. Surely, yeah, these Uruk archers rout immediately when they see the Fountain Guard come screaming towards them. Citadel Guard. Again, Ardenheim Shadow Bows, I mean, Rangers, as they were, as far as melee combatants go, they do have their uses, but they're not really a heavy duty unit. Even the Ardenheim Shadow Bows with their slightly more armoured nature, which I do not believe they've lost. Gondor infantry as well. The only real question mark I have against Gondor now is whether or not they can sustain this all the way to battle's end. They do have the momentum now, but Mordor still have manpower. They still have some good defensive positions. That trebuchet though, threading the needle there. Unfortunate. They wanted to hit the wall, I'm sure. They may have hit something in behind though. Olag High moving forward. Going to take a fairly damaging unit to bring them down. A combination of Olag High and Sauron's Will. Not the most enjoyable task for the infantry and spears to try and bring them down. There goes that section of wall, their way into the tower. Secured now, Gondor. Defensive lines already being set up. At this point it's just a case of Gondor clearing the ground, reorganising themselves, and then one final effort, I suspect, to try and rid CIRITH UNGOL of its foul overlords. Uruk archers continuously firing. Ardenheim Shadow Bows putting on a brave face of it here on the front line, but surely not. I mean, shaken as they are. Brute force being used by Gondor. Not often you can do this against Mordor, so you've got to savour it when you can. Blackguard. There's also the Uruk archers trying to whittle down the Gondor infantry as they try to move forward. I mean, I was going to say the Gondor infantry probably shouldn't just unthinkingly charge into the Mordor front line there, given the bodyguard tier units Mordor have laid on for them. A little bit more patience is going to be required. Fairly chaotic actually though now. What's left of Tundra's Fox's force over here is going to be moving in, but the Olag High have complicated things somewhat, and there's also Temple Executioners and Sauron's Will, so difficult for him to really gain too much traction, but his allies pushing through the central lane are going to make the difference for him, I think, on this occasion. Olag High bloodied, but still very much a big presence on the field. Not much of Mordor left over here, but enough to the point where Mevon's force is still being delayed from linking up with the rest of the Gondor army. Surely that's going to be it now though. The Uruk halberds are routing. The Sauron's Will. The Vets of Osgiliath, still with a bit of ammunition left. Ammunition, for once, has not actually been one of the really defining factors of Gondor's efforts here. It's been more sort of consistent pressure which has gotten them to where they want so far. Not to say archers haven't played their role, but it's not been the be-all and end-all that it usually is. But a bit of ammunition in the late game would certainly not go amiss, although here we can see a fairly intimidating little counter-attack. Troll catapult crews lining up, the beasts of Gorgoroth, and some infantry units also lurching forwards. Though upon closer inspection, when you see stuff like Uruk archers and Orc javelins making up not insubstantial portions of this little counter-attack, you have to question how effective it's really going to be. The Trebuchet crew. It's a sign that the artillery has finally run out for Gondor. Not really a huge amount of damage done to the Mordor armies, but plenty done to CIRITH and UNGOL as a fortress, bringing it into further disrepair. Fine craftsmen. The Orcs are not. This is not the Elder Scrolls. Javelins move forward again, so a bit of a bold move this from Mordor. They're not allowing Gondor really to link up fully with one another anymore. Temple Guard. Yeah, there's a lot of Olag High over here as well. Beasts of Gorgoroth. I mean, the spearmen should be able to lay down a bit of bonus damage against them, and considering how bloodied they already are, that will be a concern for them. Veterans of Osgiliath. Only 36 of them remain though. Troll catapult crews have proven to be a pretty big annoyance for Gondor on the front line in this battle so far. So there's so many of them. They may not have the same strength as their heavily armoured speaking brethren, the Olag High, but still, many of those javelins, fortunately for Gondor, thudding into the carcasses of their siege engines, acting as cover. Fountain Guard versus Temple Guard and Olag High. The Olag High won't like being up against the Fountain Guard, but I think the Temple Guard will probably have the better of them, especially with the level of support that they are currently drawing. But on this front line, are Mordor going to be successful here as well? Good positions from the veterans of Osgiliath, as I mentioned. A bit of ammunition here in the late game could be enough to make a real difference for Gondor. Seven Olag High still on the front line, but you can see the white capes of the Nimlothian Honor Guard, the black capes of the Fountain Guard. That's a lot of damage that's going to be coming their way. And they're starting to lose out a little bit on this front line as well. Tundra's Fox with one last unit of Fountain Guard, which is going to be enough to bring down what remains of the Mordor defenders over here. And so a brave counter-offensive it may have been, but maybe it was one last roll of the dice. But I don't think it's come up with the number that Mordor will have wanted. Though if they had simply remained in their fortifications, Gondor would have been able to regroup, and then it would have been much the same sort of thing. At least this gives the opportunity for some gaps in Gondor's plan to be exploited. So I think it was worth a go from Mordor, but with that, is that going to be the moment that Gondor go on to win? I mean, that is the death of a Gondorian general. Another one. Morale has already played a bit of a role in this battle so far. Can it be the thing which makes a really big difference? Veterans of Osgiliath. 47 Temple Guard still. Orc Javelin's able to get in behind the lines, and they will more directly hit their foes. Trebuchet crew should probably disengage and try and stop them from doing this, but is that the last of the volleys they have? Worthwhile if so. Mordor may very well be victorious over here. 63 Nimlothians though, that's still a lot to try and chew your way through. That's a lot of Orc Javelins. Very, very weak in melee of course, but still. Numbers. Quantity is a quality all of its own. Trolls up on the wall. Trolls always look so goofy on the walls to me. Veterans of Osgiliath. Are they going to try and save Mevon's army, or are they going to be content to let that mosh pit burn itself out in whichever way it will? That, I believe, will have been a Mordor general, given the presence of the Uruk chieftains in camera shot there. Possibly Eclipse's general at that. Trebuchet being wheeled into place. Pelagian Marines in place as well. Javelins. They still have javelins? It doesn't look like it. Short swords drawn. We often don't really get to see the Pelagian Marines in their role as sort of auxiliary light infantry. We have in this battle though. They've definitely been contributing in that regard to Gondor's momentum. Axemen of Lasarnak fighting away. Vanguard retreating a little bit, which is interesting. Fountain Guard doing the same. Worried perhaps about the Orc Javelins. Is this going to be the beginning of the final assault on the town centre? The middle of the fortress. Really an awful lot left for Mordor here, is there? I mean, there are Nazgul, the sort of unit which can make a big difference, but Temple Guard, too much in the way of Orc fodder, I would suggest. Uruk chieftains as well. Orc Javelin's going to be trying to do their thing as well, but the gatehouse will fall. They will also start contesting the walls as well, via the siege towers. So from a Mordor perspective, this engagement over here has become more imperative, although to be fair, they have actually won this by a larger margin than I would have thought possible. So perhaps hope springs eternal for the Orcs. Are they familiar with the concept of hope? Possibly not. And Lothian Honour Guard and Fountain Guard and Veterans of Osgiliath, though, forming up a front line. I don't know if they're going to have what it takes to batter through a Gondorian rearguard of that level of quality, though, if nothing else, it does mean that those very high-end units are not going to be involved, initially at the very least, on the attempt to take control of the centre of the fortress. Orc Javelins going to attempt to stop what is in effect unupgraded Gondor spearmen from establishing a beachhead up here on these walls. Trolls leading the way once more, as they have done in the past two battles on the new patch. Another possibility for attack from the Gondorians then. What is going on here? There's a lot of these units over here, Fountain Guard, Vanguard of King Elisar, maybe not content with the amount of units they have guarding this road so far. They want to make absolutely sure that Mordor don't go on to achieve anything over here. Nazgul in and amongst things. They're a slightly different model now. Got some... Well, one of them I think fell there. And in all fairness, Fountain Guard and Lothian Honor Guard, damaging units if nothing else. More Orc Javelins. The Uruk Chieftains as well. So far, Pelagia Marines able to get in behind enemy lines. Content with trying to sweep everything up behind them. The Trebuchet crew also successfully taking the walls. Just based on how I've watched Reforged in the past, I would back Gondor from here. You can never be fully sure. A few volleys from the Orc Javelins. A domineering display from the Nazgul perhaps, but it's very unlikely given the level of quality Gondor themselves still have access to. Pelagia Marines as well. Those are Chieftains, provided they still have their armour piercing as well. They're actually proving to be very, very solid here against the Gondorians. Maybe siphoning off all those units to help out against that front line down there has proven to be a pretty substantial error. I don't think they needed quite that many. I mean, it is a lot of trolls, I suppose, and Vanguard King Alisar do represent pretty good troll killers, being the heavy swordsmen that they are, but still, I don't know. It's going to be close, this one, though. This battle has been close. It's been pretty hard to call throughout, you would suggest. 34 Pelagia Marines. Individually, of course, they are better in melee than the Orc Javelins, though the numbers discrepancy here too great for them. How long can they actually withstand this level of pressure? Even the Orc fodder feeling the wind in their sails. There goes another Mordor general though. Morale could yet play its part. The town centre is right here though, so I don't actually know if routing on Mordor's part is actually going to have all that big of an impact. Trebuchet crew finally coming down from on high, trying to offer what support they can. I have to say, those Orc Javelins in support probably have been really big difference makers as we do march finally towards the final 10,000 frames. Mordor are going to be victorious over here in the town centre, but Gondor most certainly are going to be victorious over here. Though even over here actually Mordor have probably made a better fist of it than I would have expected. The damage dealing capabilities of trolls are not to be underestimated after all. Trebuchet crew still moving around up there. The trolls really starting to fall by the wayside now, however, and just having a look at what they have left. 47 Vanguard, 47 Nimlothian Honor Guard, plenty of veterans of Osgiliath as well, a few other stragglers of units mixed in there. Is that going to be enough to bring down what remains of a unit of Nazgul, a unit of Uruk Chieftains, and some of the scattered fodder that accompanies them? Close. Very close. So we are viewing this from Mordor's perspective. Mordor, as it stands, 2% behind, but is that going to be enough? I mean, I would personally still back the Gondorians with that, but Fountain Guard moving in. I don't think Mordor will have quite what it takes, although these late game struggles have been impressive. Javelins just trying to kill off what they can at this point. I mean, the margins are fine enough to the point that any kill will be celebrated. Pelagia Marines out of ammunition, joining the Fountain Guard on the front line. Defeat seems certain for them, more as a result, I think, of the fact that pretty much everything they're facing is a high-end unit. But again, if they can just soften them up for the main Gondorian force that will arrive in a bit, that will be all that truly matters. Still the trolls stand. Given the kind of forces that the Olakai have been facing off against here, it's a testament really to how tough they actually are, which, considering the numbers buffs which other trolls have been given which they have not, I suppose that is completely understandable. And this is going to free up an awful lot of Gondorian muscle to try and finally put this battle beyond Sauron's minions. Still they fight though, still. I guess it's unfortunate that it's the veterans of Osgiliath, the most defensive unit Gondor still have left over here, that's actually more directly in contact with them. Surely now. Surely. No? Gondor just going to completely ignore them? Some of these units having to make their way back across. Finally, the trolls start to fall. And there we have it. So now the engagement becomes only the one. This one. Guard doing decently, but those Orc Javelins in a pretty nasty position up on that fortification. We'll just go up to ×2 speed as the rest of the Gondorians labour to make their way over here. Obviously the gatehouse has been destroyed. Now then. Do Gondor have what it takes? Mordor heavily bloodied at this point. Those javelins though, 102 of them. That's a fair amount of DPS you're going to get off of a unit like that. That's rather annoying flickering. When I zoom in, veterans of Osgiliath moving forwards. 38 Uruk chieftains against 70 veterans, but the Uruk chieftains do have that offensive edge to work with. 7 Orc Javelins. How much ammunition the Orc Javelins have could make a huge difference here. 12 Nazgul. Still 12 of them. Another 37 Vanguard of King Elisar. Could be a huge deal actually, that. Having 12 whole Nazgul. Even 7 Orc Javelins at this stage in proceedings could be the difference between victory and defeat. Those Javelins out of ammunition as well, but it means that over 100 more Orcs are going to need to be slain in melee by the Gondorian warriors. Defeat seems certain for them. I mean, certainly the strength of the Nazgul is not in question here. Say, the Uruk chieftains have also acquitted themselves very well in the final stages of this one. We'll go up to ×2 speed because this is really all that remains of the battle at this point. It is going to take all of the frames that are left to it. Another Gondorian general falls. The Nazgul and the Temple Guard fighting alongside them, proving to be a terrifying duo indeed. Victory a distinct possibility for Gondor over here. Uruk chieftains struggling a little bit more. The Orc Javelins backing them up with numbers, but not much in the way of quality. It is looking like Mordor are turning this around, doesn't it? And they have actually taken the lead by a percentage point as well. The decision to siphon off so many units to that outer engagement. Is that where things went wrong for Gondor? May very well be. There goes, I think, a Mordor general, though like I said, the proximity of the town centre makes the slaying of Mordor generals kind of moot at this late stage. Uruk chieftains taking damage now, slowly but surely hemorrhaging their manpower. As you would expect, they are the least, really, of the Mordor bodyguard units, though you wouldn't have thought so based on their performance here. Fighting back-to-back Nimlothian on a guard now. Victory seems possible. Very close this, isn't it? It's going to come down to only a handful of combatants one way or the other. Those 27 Vanguard of King Elisar could yet prove to be absolutely key here. It comes down to them against a battered and bruised 3 or 4 Nazgul. Could that be where things change? The Orc Javelins obviously not at the level. Gondor may very well have saved themselves, dug themselves out of the hole. Perhaps on the back of the newly returned Vanguard of King Elisar as well, proving their worth to Gondor as a newly reintroduced part of their roster. And that's something else Gondor can do, of course. Take the town centre, and then the Nazgul are going to need to peel themselves off the Nimlothians, albeit the Nazgul are winning fairly heavily over there. Well, now we shall see if the Nazgul really are all that. Can they bring down what remains of Gondor? Vanguard of King Elisar are going to have to be the ones to do the heavy lifting here. The Trebuchet crew just here to really make up the numbers. Any damage they can do will be purely window dressing. One of the closest battles we've seen in a while, this. Heartening to see that it's come on a new patch with a new map as well. Or at least a heavily, heavily changed map. Vanguard of King Elisar are taking damage at a rate of knots, aren't they? And the Nazgul still haven't lost a single extra unit. It's rare actually that we see the Nazgul perform quite this well. Without any sort of support. They are leaving. Where are they going? This is very peculiar. I don't think there's anything else on the map. There's a red star over here. Is that a general unit? Doesn't look like it. So I think this is all that remains. What's going on here? This is a bit of a peculiar end to this fight. This is a bit of a shame. Times 6. I'm puzzled. I'm very confused. I don't know really what to say about what's going on here. Okay, very peculiar. There must have been a unit over there that they were interested in killing off. Let's go up to times 6 speed for that. Madness. We can now return. It is going to be a Mordor victory though, of that there can be no doubt. The Vanguard of King Elisar are strong, but not strong enough to face the Nazgul in equal numbers. Indeed, I don't think anything in the game really is strong enough to face the Nazgul in equal numbers outside of very weird things like the Oathbreakers. And that is going to be that. The difference of 9. And CIRITH and UNGOL remains in Mordor hands, and I'm sure that they can send another filthy Orc Legion to man this place. I don't know whether the Gondorians will be quite so quick to recover from such a devastating defeat as this. Even if they had won, it probably would have been the most Pyrrhic victory you could ever imagine. Very close. I don't know how 2% of the Mordor roster still remains. 9 Nazgul definitely does not represent proportionally 2% of the entire Mordor force. And the final Gondorian general. bisected. And that is going to be that. And there we have it. Another very entertaining battle on the new patch with another very well-designed map. We see the defenders win this time as well, which is heartening to see given the balance changes and the like, obviously with Rangers now no longer being a crutch that can be relied upon. They were still useful for Mordor here, though not in the same way that they were in previous versions of the game. I'm not going to go too heavily into tactics and what could have been done differently here, because I think to a certain extent these are more a showcase more so than really do everything possible that you can to win, although there wasn't really too many examples of weirdness in this one, unlike in the last one where Ered Luin's initial defences were a little bit hamstrung, I think, by the way that they wanted the map to go, whereas on this occasion I don't think you would really notice too much of that. Unfortunate for Gondor, they got pretty close, and I have to say, if this was the last patch, Gondor, if they had played it in the same way, wouldn't have gotten close to Mordor in that regard, because the numbers wouldn't have been with them, their regular units wouldn't have been near as efficient as they were on this occasion. But it just comes down to little individual choices, I think, especially towards the end of the game, where they needed to be a little bit more consolidatory with what they had left, and that little counter-attack from Mordor, maybe it did introduce a bit of chaos, which ultimately helped Mordor on their way to victory here. Let's see what did the damage then for Mordor. I think the Uruk Chieftains, maybe not Eclipse's example of the unit, but they actually did very well. The Olag High were definitely a big part of what Mordor were doing as well. Trolls in general do seem to be taking a bigger emphasis in this version of the game. Temple Guard and Sauron's Will also doing their thing. Several units breaking 200 kills, including the Catapult. Uruk Halberds in the early game were very important, less so as the game wore on, but still, they definitely did their part. Cannon Fodder's army, the Nazgul, obviously we saw them be the thing which ultimately won Mordor the game late on, though other things, of course, set that victory up. Several units breaking 100, including again the Halberds and the Olag High, unsurprisingly. Sin's army, Uruk Chieftains did very well for him, Temple Guard did as well. Several units breaking 100, including the Halberds. Beasts of Gorgoroth getting 486 kills, so in spite of the maybe hit-and-run nature that we saw from them, they were still very effective. I mean, 486 kills is a huge amount, and like I said, units like them and the Mumakil are going to be far more useful in this variant of the game, though of course they are still very expensive, so not really overpowered relative to their cost. And then down here, Javelin's doing nicely, Mauler's actually doing okay early on, Sauron's Will also, so armour-piercing shock troops for Mr. Sneakman doing the business. So yeah, big thank you to Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud for sending this one in. Big thanks as well to all the players for allowing me to show this one in the as of yet unreleased version of the game. But we are getting ever closer to that at this point, it would appear, with a higher density of these kind of replays coming out. And I think I've got one more to show on the test patch as well, which is a runic focused one, I think. So that's going to be worth looking out for, because that will also be coming out fairly soon. I've got some stuff from the slightly smaller but still significant update from Silmarillion as well, which hopefully I can show off in the next couple of weeks as well as trying to make my way through the entirety of the backlog from the old patch of Reforged as well, before we bid it goodbye once and for all. It's been around for a while at this point, so it'll be interesting to finally see the back of it. But yes, that's going to be the focus for the next couple of weeks. Keep an eye on the channel updates as well, because there will likely be a couple of them to consider. But again, we'll see about that. It's the sort of thing which I'm still not sure about myself yet, but still. Anyway, that's cryptic, but it's all I have at the moment, and I really should stop wedging sort of channel future talk at the end of these replays quite so much, but still. Anyway, enough of my waffling. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.